now we'll talk about your neural system, your neurons. Okay. So, endocrine system is the slower one. It's bloodstream. It takes longer to get there, generally speaking, and it takes longer to go away. Neurons, for the most part, are, at least as far as our perception goes, instantaneous. So, we talked about it yesterday. What is the way in which neurons communicate with each other? That makes this so quick, right? There's a reason why the hormones go slowly and the neurons go quickly. Yeah, electrochemical, right. So it's electricity and chemicals. It's a combination. Oops. All right, so you have the two elements here. The first part, obviously electricity, or at least static. The charges of ions, which I'll show you briefly. It doesn't really matter that much. Well, it does matter. They have had a couple questions about it before. But I'm not super concerned with knowing every detail of how a neuron fires, but you should have a basic understanding of how it communicates. So you got the electricity, which we'll talk about, and then you've got the chemical portion, and we call these, and this is a real name, I definitely need you to know this one, a neurotransmitter. All right, those are the chemicals with which your brain communicates. The neurons in between them send signals to the rest of your body, takes in information, and it's also what allows us to feel. So when you feel happy or sad or excited or alert or tired or etc., it could be hormonal or it could be a neurochemical, a neurotransmitter. All right. So for example, the four common ones. Yeah, we'll talk about the four common ones. There's a bunch. There's I don't remember the exact number, but there's a lot. It's more than 40. I think I might have the number wrong, but we're just going to talk about like the primary four. I don't think we'll ever talk about more than these four in this class. So neurotransmitters, you may have heard of some of these. One of the common ones is dopamine. That's your reward center, your neurochemical that you experience reward with. So those are the positive feelings. So when you bite into, let's say you like brownies, most people like brownies, whatever your favorite brownie is, made by whoever your favorite baker is, at the time at which it is most tasteful to you, whether it's just out of the oven or a day later or whatever, you take a bite of it. It feels sweet. You get the fat and the sugar on your tongue. It tastes good and whatever, so that's good. But it actually will perk your mood a little bit, which is why people, when they're not feeling well, when they're low energy, when they're depressed or whatever, they'll actually turn to food, whatever their favorite food is, to sort of boost their mood temporarily. And the reason why that's occurring is dopamine, all right? And that's what makes you feel positive and good and elated and happy and all of that. It perks your mood up, right? And that's actually a chemical. So your feelings aren't like this mystical thing where the sensation from some other part of the universe comes in and taps into you and you're channeling it. No, it's really just chemicals. And we can actually simulate it too. That's what drugs do. Drugs take these neurochemicals we like, these neurotransmitters, and they simulate them. All right, so they make our brain think that it's dopamine when it's not, or it causes a surge of dopamine synthetically. So that's what drugs do. We'll talk about drugs in unit 3, maybe 5. I can't remember what unit it is, but we'll talk about that later. But that's kind of what they do. So this is my reward neurotransmitter. All right, that's my happiness, alertness, well, not alertness, but happiness, positivity. This is what people generally like. And this, by the way, anytime you're feeling good, like let's say you accomplish a goal, like you're like, oh man, I got to get this speech, you're all nervous about it, you work on it all night, you prepare a good speech, you go up, maybe it's difficult, but you do it, and afterwards you're like, oh, I did it, I think that was good, that was a good job, I communicated what I wanted to, everything went well, all my hard work paid off. Are you going to feel good if you have those thoughts? You are, right? And that good feeling actually comes from your dopamine. All right, and that actually drives our decision making and planning, because most of the stuff we do that's important doesn't actually affect us in that moment, like grades, for example. Right, the grades you get, you don't get them all on that instantaneous day. You study for a day when you take that quiz or test or whatever, and the results are sometime in the future. And our ability to plan and feeling good about planning, especially when we accomplish our goal, that's reinforced by our brain going, yeah, yes, here's some dopamine. And it makes us feel good about doing it. All right, so that's one of them. Another one, this one's more complicated, but it's very, very, very important. It's a very, very old neurochemical, by the way. This goes all the way back more than 300 million years ago, and we share this with almost every single animal on the planet. Our receptors and our circuitry in our brain for serotonin. So serotonin has several roles, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Actually, I'm going to take this jack off the eye. Serotonin, you need a correct balance of, the more the better in most cases. But you want to be able to have your body regulate your serotonin, because this will keep you feeling more emotionally stable. What I mean by that is not extremely sad or not extremely happy when something good or bad happens. All right? People with high levels of serotonin are generally have a more stable mood, like I mentioned, so they're less prone to mood disorders, getting depressed, being anxious, being overly excited for something, like addicted to it, for example. People with high serotonin are more resistant to this. And this has to do with mood regulation. And I'm oversimplifying, guys. These all have multiple roles, but I'm just giving you the gist of it to help you understand. A lot to do with mood regulation. So example, people who are depressed sometimes, one of the better ways they can try to deal with, cure, or treat their depression is to take medications that increase the amount of serotonin in their brain, and that'll help regulate their mood. And it also has to do with your, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but your sense of self-value, I guess you would say. And here's what I mean by that. If you feel like you are succeeding in life, and I don't mean like tricking yourself into succeeding, like sitting there going, I'm a great person, I'm good at what I do, I'm talking like your brain actually, and this goes back millions of years, we actually share this circuitry as far back as like crustaceans in the ocean. Lobsters have this. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for how other people are doing compared to you. All right? And the criteria can be arbitrary. It could be like how popular you are, or how successful your business is, or how much money you have, or how strong you are, how fast you are, how good at a sport you are, how smart you are. Whatever it is, whatever you value, you are constantly scanning yourself compared to other members of society. All right? So let's say you really care about basketball. All right? You dedicate a lot of time to it. So you, consciously and unconsciously, are kind of scanning your position amongst all other basketball players you know. All right? So if you are the best basketball player at your school, like you score the most points, you get the most play time, it's clear that when you're on the court, your team is better than when you're not on the court. That's somebody, and maybe in your league too, so all the people you're playing against, you are one of or the best person there. You're better than almost everyone you know at basketball. You are, if we looked at your brain, almost certainly, we would find that your levels of serotonin are high, because you've kind of noticed that you're doing really well. Like if there's a hierarchy of basketball players, like most people are bad basketball players because they either never played it, or they're not coordinated, they don't care, whatever. And then you've got a smaller amount of people that are okay at basketball. Maybe they got a little natural talent, maybe they played a little bit. Then you've got the players that are good, right? They've played it before, maybe they're taller or faster, they've played a lot before, they have a talent and a skill. And then at the top you've got the very good, and maybe the tippy top you've got the elite, right? These are the ones that would go on to play college ball and NBA ball and things like that. So wherever you place yourself, however you value yourself, and I don't mean like consciously, like I could be an NBA player, like thinking that constantly is not going to work. But if you actually go out and you reliably do well in basketball compared to other people your age or your skill level, your brain kind of checks where you are on this hierarchy, in this case of basketball. And the higher you are on this hierarchy, generally speaking, the higher levels of serotonin you have. All right, so it's kind of like a self-check assessment for how much confidence you have in yourself. And I don't just mean like fake confidence, like telling yourself you're good. Like you actually do good. You go out there, you're like, I'm going to do well. I'm going to beat this guy or this team or have this game, and you actually do. That is generally reflected in people's serotonin levels as well. What do you think, though, if is going to happen? Let's say I went to a small school, super small school, private school, like had like 50 students in the whole thing, all right? And there, I was super good at basketball, just because no one else was any good. Like there's only a few other students that even played it. They're shorter or slower, or they don't care about basketball. So just because I was a little tall and a little fast, I was better than all of them at basketball. If I went to that school and I checked their serotonin levels, where would I probably find that person's serotonin at? Near the bottom or their top? Probably near the top, right? They probably have higher compared to the other ones that cared about basketball and weren't as good. All right. So that's great for that guy or girl, right? They think they're doing great. Their neurochemistry reflects that. They're feeling confident. But then we go and take this little team from this little private school with like nobody in it, and we go to a tournament in the Bay Area or Southern California with massive schools, right? And they've got a bunch of fast players, tall players who have played their whole life all around the year, done competitive teams. Like they're destined for at least college, if not a minor league or a major league NBA position. How do you think that person's going to do who's had no real competition and they're just kind of enjoying being in a pool of small players? They're going to do badly, right? So what do you think is going to happen to that individual who's a big fish in a small pond, but then he goes out to the ocean and sees there's a lot of much bigger fish out there? What do you think is going to happen to their serotonin levels over time as they keep realizing that there are many other players better and taller and faster than them, and they maybe never will catch up to them? It's going to drop, exactly. So it's kind of a two-way thing here. It's, depending on how I see others, is going to affect my serotonin levels. But at the same time, my serotonin levels are going to make me more resistant to being upset about something or really excited about something. So it's kind of a two-way thing. But that's generally what you can expect if you're looking at serotonin levels. And they've actually tested this out in many other animals. One of the more famous examples was crustaceans, which we split off from evolutionarily, like well over a couple hundred million, like way before there were even trees like that even existed. We branched off from these crustaceans like lobsters. And we share the exact same serotonin circuits regarding status that they do. So we found that if you go and look at lobsters, the males fight over territory underwater, all right? So I think you can assume if they're fighting, a bigger male has an advantage, right? That's why they have weight classes, by the way, in like the UFC and boxing, because that actually matters quite a bit if you're larger than your opponent. So the big males tend to do better, so they push other lobsters off of their territory, and yay them, they get access to more females in that area, all right? So what you find is you've got several males with like a larger part of territory, and then maybe on the edges or in between, you've got males that aren't as big and aren't as good as fighting, have much smaller territory to control. All right, cool. So let's compare. If I looked at the males that are bigger and win more fights and they have bigger territory, where do you think their serotonin levels are going to be on here? On the higher parts, right? And the worse, I guess you would say, that the male lobsters do in fighting, or the smaller territory they have, is usually correlated also with their serotonin levels. They'll be lower. But you can actually make these ones that are close to depressed or see themselves as low status, you can actually make them think that they're high status. How do you think you can do that? How do you think I can do that? With medication. Give what to them? Yeah, you give them, we'll talk about what SSRIs are and how it works, but just to simplify for now, you give them medication that boosts their serotonin levels. It actually technically makes you keep cycling the same ones over, but we'll get into that later. That'll actually make them think they're up here. So normally, when they lose a fight, they kind of get dejected and they go off and get off that male's territory, and they're a little depressed until they can get their own territory or beat a male or whatever. But if I go take a male that lost and I give him a serotonin an SSRI, one that increased their serotonin, all of a sudden, they'll go right back and fight that male immediately. They're much more likely to fight because they think that incorrectly, that they're more dominant or competent in their field. So even if they are an unsuccessful male, you give them the SSRI, it sort of tricks their brain chemistry into thinking, no, I am. So I'll go fight this big male over here because I got no problem doing that, even though they're doomed to fail because they're like half the size of it. But it's an interesting phenomenon. So anyways, that's what these do. So all of these, by the way, have multiple roles, but I'm just giving you kind of their primary roles. Because when we talk about serotonin in this class, we really only use it to talk about mood stabilizing, as far as like how it affects depression or bipolar disorder and all these other ones. You with me so far? A little bit? Okay. Other ones. Oh, endorphins, that's a big one. Anybody know what endorphins do? If I hurt myself, I fall, I have surgery, whatever, it hurts, obviously, and I'll have pain in that region over and over. So what do you do, generally, when you're having this like chronic pain and you want to get rid of it, at least for a while?
Endorphins make you feel less.
Yeah, they make you feel less pain. Yeah, okay, we'll get into that. But what do you do generally when you, what? What kind of medicine? A painkiller, right. Could be a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like Tylenol or aspirin, ibuprofen, or you can get into the more opioid stuff, which we'll talk about when we talk about a drug unit. But they basically do the same thing in different ways. They're mimicking endorphins because these are your natural painkillers. All right, and when you have a surge of them, like let's say you got hurt or you take Advil or something like that, and it simulates endorphins, it'll actually give you, if you have enough of it, a sort of, they call it a runner's high, but it is kind of like almost like a drug high in that you'll feel a little euphoric, like things are just very positive and optimistic. You'll feel warmer, and then people also report feeling like as if they're like lighter themselves, like almost like they're floating. That's like the extreme end if they took a lot of painkillers or they got a huge endorphin rush. But that's what painkillers do. And they do give you a little bit of euphoria if you get a lot of them. That's why, by the way, painkillers will inevitably, if you keep using them or abuse them, they will become addictive because you get used to that high state and your body adjusts to that. And it will require way more endorphins or painkillers to not feel down or bad or in pain. But we'll get into that when we get to the drug unit. But that's kind of what they do. So again, if I hurt myself and I'm getting a lot of pain, my brain will release endorphins to make that pain sort of go away or reduce. And obviously your body can only do so much, and that's why if you're really in pain because of an injury or surgery, they can use medications to like give you synthetic endorphins that make that pain go away. All right, but it's not just magic when you take that pill. It's actually mimicking the painkillers you already have and telling tricking your body into thinking they're endorphins and then reducing that amount of pain that's coming from wherever the pain is coming from. But you can get addicted, which we'll talk about later. All right, the other one, norepinephrine and epinephrine. We'll just do norepinephrine for now. This has a lot to do with my arousal and alertness and focus. That's what I'll get a spike of. Like if I have an adrenaline rush and I get adrenaline, don't worry, it'll be in the notes. If I get an adrenaline rush, like I see something scary or I feel something scary and I get a shot of adrenaline, I usually also get norepinephrine and epinephrine, and those are what make me actually feel alert. So if I'm feeling tired or unfocused or disinterested, I've probably got very low amounts of norepinephrine or epinephrine at that point. But if I see something that makes me interested, or I become fearful or anxious or excited, and I feel more focused, more alert, more awake, that is almost certainly because my brain has released more norepinephrine or epinephrine. All right, those are the ones that kind of handle that. So like, it's not some mystical force that's pulling strings and making you focused or awake or happy or sad or whatever. It's your actual brain, and it's actually releasing or managing or mismanaging these neurotransmitters. That's what actually makes you feel certain ways. All right, so these feelings aren't, again, magical, mystical forces. It's just chemicals in your brain. that we don't totally understand yet, but we're understanding more and more as we go. Are you with me so far on that? All right, cool. So let's talk about how it actually works then, and then we'll talk about the different systems. I'm going out of order that I have in the notes, but oh well. So here's how a neuron actually works. So a neuron is a nerve cell. And we're talking about here a brain cell specifically, but we're just going to say nerve cell for now. And they basically look like and function like this. So it's going to be kind of a long, skinny, almost squid-like looking cell that uses a combination of electricity and these chemicals to communicate. So most look like this. At the tail end, these are my receptors. These are where I get my information from. These, they've got receptors at the end here that connect to other axons, which we'll get to in a second. These are what we call dendrites. All right, those are my receptors. Those are receiving signals from the neurons it's connected to, the other nerve cells it's connected to. All right, so you have billions, if not trillions. I know for sure you have billions. Maybe you have trillions, but it's in the billions and trillions of how many you have in your body. They're so small, and they're paired together in these large lines and networks in your brain, and these communicate to each other, and that's how your body actually communicates. So dendrites receive it, and they travel through. And the actual root of the cell itself, with the DNA and the mitochondria and the stuff that has the blueprint of what builds the cell body, that's the soma, and that's up here, right? So that's the soma. And that's where I'll find the DNA, my blueprint, the mitochondria, I think it provides the energy, all that stuff in my neuron, my nerve cell.
You're supposed to give them until 1040, they report there 1056.
Okay. So give them a 1040. Okay, that's a little good. So 10 till, remind me to pass these out, if you guys can. So 55 minutes, yeah. Okay, where was I? Oh, soma. Yeah, that's the cell body. Okay, so that's where your DNA, mitochondria, all that stuff is, all the proteins that actually make the cell. That is where that is stored, all right? And here's where we start getting more into the actual complicated, I'm gonna make this thinner actually, terminology. Okay, so dendrites receive the signals in the cells. They'll actually receive the neurochemicals, by the way, and then they're gonna send an electrical signal down to the other end, the axon. All right, so this is going down, and this is technically what's called the axon. And the axon, at the end, connects to other dendrites. So, this is the axon. Do I have a fourth part that I put in there? Is it just the myelin sheaths, or the synaptic gap that I have? Okay, that's actually at the end here, synapse. Okay, so that's the basic structure of it, all right? Receiving, sending. All right, and information, of course, does flow through here to be sent. Everyone with me so far? All right, sweet. So this is how they communicate. The axons here, some people call this the synapse. This is where there's a tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic gap between the tip of this axon and the next nerve cell, the next neuron's dendrites, right? So I would just basically take this exact thing I drew here and put another one that's touching it, or almost touching it right next to it. So imagine another set of dendrites at the other end here. Actually, I'll just put one out. All right, so there's the dendrites from the next neuron. This one won't be as pretty. And it goes to the next one, and so on and so forth. All right, so that's my next neuron, okay? And then, of course, there'd be one here, too, and connected in different ways. So the way the message goes from this to this are these neurochemicals. All right, it actually, the axon releases these, and they travel over here, and they activate receptor ports in the dendrite of the next neuron, and that's what sends the message to this axon, which sends the same message, which sends the same message, which sends the same message, all the way through to whatever part of your body or part of your brain is being used. And that's exactly how it's going to work. So chemicals go between. So what's going to tell my dendrites what was received and tell my axons what to release? So I've got the neurochemical as the go-between, all right? It's what carries the message from one neuron to the next. But what carries it from the dendrites to the axons, do you think? So I've got neurochemicals. What other part have I not explained yet? Those are the neurotransmitters. Yeah, the electric part is the part that I haven't communicated. All right, so the electricity portion is kind of like the go-between, specifically here on the axon, this portion right here. All right, so what I'm going to do for as far as drawing, I'm going to zoom in on that little pathway. All right, so the part I'm going to draw up here is just going to be like this, blown up, big size. All right, so you with me? All right, so these neurotransmitters, these are the chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, norepinephrine, there's other ones too, but we're just going to look at these four for now. The axon releases them, they're received by the dendrites, and then they're like, okay, that was, say it was dopamine. Releases dopamine, it hops over here to the dendrite, activates the dopamine receptor, and it says, oh, that was dopamine, so it sends the signal down here to the next axon, which carries that same message on throughout all of your neurons. Okay, so if I zoom in here, here's how this works. I'm not even sure why they want us to know this, but they do. And again, they've asked a couple questions about it before, so I gotta tell you. So if I zoom in on this axon portion of this pathway, here's what it'll look like, or roughly speaking. So if I zoom in, I have a membrane here, which is kind of like a wall. But things can go in and out of it if they fit the right shape. So it's just like the hormone receptors. They only fit certain pieces, right? So like it's just like when you're a little kid and you got those little kind of like puzzle things that have like a shape like a star. You can't shove the square into the star; it won't fit. The only thing that fits is the star. It's very much like these membranes. So these membranes have these little gateways, but again, they only fit certain molecules in them, right? Just like those little jigsaw things for little kids. You can't shove the star into the square and vice versa. It only accepts certain things. Okay, so if I look in here, I have, I think it's the sodium outside, and potassium inside. I forget which is which. So I have in the notes which one's outside.
Sodium's outside.
Okay, thank you. So we've got the sodium molecules out here. And I have potassium molecules in here. And these are ions. Do you guys know what ions are? Okay, it's from chemistry. It's a term meaning they either have a negative or a positive charge, meaning they have either an extra electron or they're lacking an electron. All right. In this case, they're going to be negative, so they have an extra electron because that's a negative charge. So all these little ions are a negative charge, so they're all negative. Okay. So what makes the, well, why do we care about the electrical charge? If you have two negatives, it's like a magnet. Do they do anything? No, they just repel. You can't even stick them together. What causes a magnet to go and stick together?
Opposite.
Yeah, you gotta have a positive, right? Because those electrons, this extra electron is looking for an atom or a particle that's got an opening for an electron, and they'll hop over to it. All right, because that's why you can't take a magnet and stick both ends together. Because if you put two negative charges together, they don't go together. They actually push away. Or take two positive ends, they'll push away. But if I take a positive and a negative, they'll share electrons, and that's what sucks them together. All right. So I got a bunch of negatives. So what makes this different is inside I have a bunch of tiny little molecules called proteins. All right, and I don't mean protein like I need a protein shake. I mean proteins like these tiny, tiny, tiny little molecules inside your cells that I told you about these yesterday. They have like these functions. We don't really know, at least I haven't heard anyway, how they work, because they actually like go in your cell and they like have a job. They like go, I got to move this thing. They'll get energy from your cell, ATP, and they'll like move things or turn things on and off. And we don't know what makes those things go and how they know what to do, but they do. There's proteins inside here. And those proteins have a positive charge. All right, with me? Okay. So here's how I get electricity to move down my axon and send a signal. If I've got these closed off, which I do right now, they're closed, what is the charge that's on the outside? It's going to be negative. All the things are negative, right? It's just negative, negative. So what's it waiting for? It's waiting for positive, right? It's always waiting to combine with anything that's positive, okay? So when I separate all the sodium on the outside, and I leave the potassium inside and these proteins, there's actually, for whatever reason, the numbers, the way they match up, the proteins make it so that there's actually more of a positive charge on the inside. So what would happen if I opened up these gates here? Would everything stay the same?
No.
What would happen? What? Yes, or the proteins and potassium perhaps, depending on which is where, would go out. So they're actually going to switch places. This is called, with water anyway, it's called osmosis. The universe always evens itself out. So if like I'm holding if I take a cup of water and I put a divider in it and I pour all the water into this side, what's going to happen when I poke a hole in this little divider? Yeah, it's going to, so I poke a bunch of little holes in here, it's going to pour into the other side. Obviously, it's trying to reach equilibrium. It does that even with like sponges. Like the water, for whatever reason, is always trying to even itself out. That's why you can put a tissue in a cup of water, and what happens to the tissue? Does it just get wet, the part that touches the water? No, what happens? Yeah, the water actually climbs inside the tissue because it's always trying to even itself out. That's called osmosis. So the magnetism is the same way, electrical charge. So if I open this up, if I open the barrier, it's going to try to even its own charge out. All right. So when I receive a signal from a dendrite, or from an axon rather, and it tells my dendrite, oh, that was dopamine, it's going to open up these gates. So you've got energy inside. I'm not gonna get too into it. It's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and that's what activates and gives you energy for your cells to do this. That's why, by the way, if you don't get water, you don't have any ATP, so none of your cells can do anything. So you die very quickly if you have zero water. That's what actually, and the oxygen. So you have to breathe and take in oxygen and calories for your cells to do anything. It puts a bunch of ATP in your cells, and that allows your cells to move. If you don't have water, or you don't breathe and have oxygen, or you don't have enough food, you can't do that, your cells die. That's what kills you if you are strangled or don't get enough water or don't get enough food. All right, but we're not gonna get into that, just know that's what happened. So these open up, and then you guys already told me what's gonna happen. Yeah, they're gonna spread out, right? So my Ks and NAs and Ps are all gonna scramble until the point that some have actually switched sides, all right, to change the charge. All right, so yay, now I have an even charge across the board. All right, so I've sent one rushing signal. Everything went whoop, and went to their different areas, and that's what that electrical signal is going to be as it moves through. All right, but that would only be one single signal. That would be it. It'd just be like one. That's all it would be. All right, and I can't communicate with just one signal, one single signal. That's a tongue twister. I'm gonna need to be able to do this again if these things, because like your neurons don't just communicate one time ever. They're like, what's my one job? Here it is, and then they die. They have to be able to do that over and over again. So what you have are these little mechanisms called sodium-potassium pumps on your cell membranes. And what they do is they grab the floating Ks and NAs that have switched places and the proteins, and they grab them and throw them back out inside and inside. So very quickly, the potassium gets sucked back in through these little pumps that only grab that specific size molecule, right? It's just like the little kid puzzle. It can only grab the potassium molecule, throws it on through, and the sodium is pumped out, all right? And the proteins also move. So what's that gonna reset? What's gonna happen again when all these things go back to where they were? The inside will be positive, right? I get rid of all my NAs. My proteins have moved as well. So it's back to just potassium and just the positive proteins. And on the outside, all the potassium have been moved back in. Any proteins that were have been moved back in too. So what charge am I left with on the outside?
Negative.
Negative. Okay, cool. This is like a loaded gun, essentially. All right, it's ready to fire. That is what we call action potential. It's like when you pull back a rubber band. That's potential energy. Because I don't have a rubber band, I don't think. Oh, I do. Let me go get it. Sorry if I shoot it at you. All right. So this rubber band, if I just let go of it, is it going to do anything except just fall? No, it's just going to fall, right? But what if I do this? What happens if I let go of it now? It's going to shoot, right? So I know that the electrical charge thing doesn't quite work, but this is like a loaded rubber band or loaded gun. It's ready to fire, essentially, right? And as soon as I get the signal, it's released, and boom, I release the energy. And in this case, the molecules swap places, right? That's what it's waiting for. And then the sodium-potassium pumps switch everything back to make it loaded again. So when these things are closed and they've been separated, it's waiting for a signal, it's ready to go. But if I open them, like when I get a signal, and they all switch places and they have even charges, that's just like a rubber band that's set to do nothing. It's got no potential there. All right. So action potential is when that axon is ready to fire its electrical signals, because all of the sodium and potassium have been switched, and there's a negative charge on the outside and a positive charge on the inside. All right. And that mechanism happens very, very, very quickly, like instantaneously as far as we can tell. It's just going like insanely fast on a very small scale. All right. So that's how I send one signal, but how the hell is my axon supposed to know which of these was received? Like, are there letters there? How could I communicate with just a signal? Is there a language we know about where you communicate with just single signals?
Isn't it like the frequency of this?
Yes, it's the frequency. It's just like Morse code. Anybody know what Morse code is?
Yeah.
Oh, good. A good chunk of you do. A couple of you don't. That's basically where I can't see anything, right? And I only have one thing I can hear. It's just one single sound, like a tap or a, we've probably heard it on like shows and things like it's like a do-do-do-do-do-do-do. That's all they can hear. It's like, how do you know what they're trying to say? You know what they're trying to say based on how many times or how long they hold that do-do-do-do sound. All right, so it's like Morse code. So your axon communicates which one of these was received by sending a different frequency. So I'm going to make it up. Let's pretend that dopamine, when it's received, it's like, okay, that was dopamine. The signal it sends is like 3 quick taps. So 3 taps is dopamine. 4 taps is serotonin. 2 fast taps and 2 slow taps are endorphins. And then 1 fast tap and 3 slow taps are norepinephrine. All right, so that's how my axons would know which one to release. So they'd be sitting there always listening, obviously, and waiting for these electrical pulses to come through. And if I get 3 taps, it knows, oh, that's dopamine. And it releases dopamine to the next dendrite, and the signal keeps on going. If it heard 2 fast taps and then 2 slow taps, it would know, oh, that was endorphins, released endorphins, and the signal keeps going on. All right, that's how they communicate. So it's the frequency of those little electrical signals. All right, I know it's super mechanical and engineering focused, and well, it's probably one of the more boring things we talk about, but that's how it actually works. All right, so are we clear so far on how the message goes across the neuron? Do we have that down? Okay. All right, nervous system. So I'm not talking about the whole system yet. We're still talking about the actual nerves themselves and how they communicate. We could try to refresh the memory on it. Here's how one roughly looks. What would these be called? Hands. So I can give you more bucks.
Dendrites?
Yeah, dendrites. I should have made a joke about being dendrite, but oh well. Over here where the electrical signals sent. What?
Axon.
Axon. Okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. Axon. What about that?
Soma.
Soma. Nice. It's the body. Okay. And before I lose track. I didn't get a chance to talk about it yet, but what's this area called with the gap?
Axons, right?
Okay, you can call it that, but the term we're looking for I'll accept that. But there's another term for it, where this gap where they communicate between.
Synapses?
Yeah, synaptic gap or synapses when they're going between. Or synapses, yeah. I'll give you both for that. Okay. When I zoom in on the where's your name? There it is. When I zoom in on the axon here, and I blow it up, and I got my membranes. I've got ions in, out, and proteins. Can anybody tell me which one's which as far as where they go and what the charges are? I'll give you 2 for that. Oh, you can't look, sorry.
Inside is potassium and it's negative, and outside is sodium that's positive.
Okay, close except for the charge on the outside. So you've got, you do have the sodium, so I'll give you for that. On the outside, and the potassium on the inside. But what are the charges, and also what's missing on the inside?
The potassium and the sodium are both negative.
Yep.
And there's proteins on the inside that are positive.
Nice, gives a net charge here of what? What? No, if they're separated.
Positive?
Positive. Nice, and then negatives on the outside. Cool. When it's loaded like that, like a gun, ready to go and send a signal, electrical impulse. What do we call that?
Action potential.
Nice, action potential. All right, so when I receive a chemical signal from the previous axon or the previous neuron, what are those chemicals called? I don't need the name of the 4 of them that I told you about. I just need like the term that describes all of these chemicals. What are they called? You again? Yeah.
Neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters, right. Right, so we talked about dopamine, endorphins, and what else? Serotonin and norepinephrine. Okay, cool. So neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitter arrives, let's say it's dopamine, and it's like, boom, it activates the dopamine receptor, so it knows what pattern of electrical signal to send to communicate. It goes down, right? So these membranes open up, they all swap places. I'm not going to swap individuals, but they swap places in sodium, potassium, to get a net charge of neutral, nothing, all right? How does it reset? So that's no longer potential. How does it reset these ions to change the charges to go back to being ready for another charge?
I think it's sodium, potassium.
There you go. These sodium potassium pumps, nice, are the ones that rearrange them to bring the charge back. Uses energy to do that. Cool. That's AT, but we don't need to know that. What we do need to know, though, is just basically so you have an understanding. This is the same with hormones, too. How do these pumps work? How do they only grab certain ions, or in the case of hormones, or neurotransmitters, how are they only activated by certain hormones or certain neurotransmitters?
Frequencies?
Oh, that's how they know which one to send, but I'm talking about activating these things. Like it grabs either sodium ions or potassium ions or neurotransmitters. They only accept certain neurotransmitters. Or for hormones, they're only activated by certain hormones and not others. Why? How? What determines that?
Because they have a specific shape.
Yep, they have a specific signal and shape, right? So they would only fit in one, right? So if I have an estrogen receptor and then a growth hormone rolls by, it's not going to activate it, right? Because it doesn't fit in. It's just like the little kid puzzles I talked about with the shapes, like it's a star, but you can only fit the star in. If you have a square, it's not going to fit in there. It's just like, well, it's similar to that. All right, so that's how it works. Yeah, sodium, potassium pumps. Cool. We got a refresher there. Wait, who gave me the sodium, potassium pump answer? Somebody did. Oh, I already gave you for that one. Oh, and then nobody gave me it. Who said it fit? Somebody said that. Was it James? I think it was. Okay, cool. All right. So that's kind of a refresher of what we talked about. Now let's talk about this region, the synapse, the synaptic gap. All right, so I'm going to zoom in again to look at the end here. So when the communication is going from one axon to the dendrites to the next one, that's what we're zooming in on. There's a tiny little gap. It's called the synaptic gap. So here's the end of my axon at the synapse. This is dying on me. I did, yes.
Wow.
Thrown away a lot of markers, so got a lot of practice. Okay, cool. there's a little gap, and then here's the dendrite for the other side. So just like with the hormones or the sodium-potassium pump, there's receptors on the dendrite, and they only accept certain shapes or chemical signals, right? So we're going to use shapes just to make it simple for us. So we'll pretend there's going to be more than 4, but we're just going to use 4. So one's a triangle, all right? That'll be dopamine. Square is going to be serotonin, and a circle is endorphin. We only do 3, that's fine. All right, those are my neurotransmitters. Again, I got more than 3, but that's just what we're saying for right now. All right, so what do you think the shape of my dopamine receptors will be, the ones that are activated by dopamine? They're going to be triangles, right, yeah. So on my dendrite, I have a bunch of receptors that can be activated by the release of dopamine or endorphins or serotonin. All right, so here's one for a square, here's one for a triangle, here's one for a circle. We'll just keep that pattern going. Good enough. All right, so it looks like that. Obviously it's 3D, not 2D, so there's a bunch over here, and there's a bunch of different ones, but just understand that's the basic scheme. Certain receptors over here only accept the correct chemical signal, in this case a shape. All right, so let's say I hurt myself on accident playing something. If I get hurt, what's my body do to try to alleviate that pain? What's it release? What neurotransmitter? Endorphins, right. These are my painkillers. And a lot of course, makes you feel euphoric and floaty and warm and all that stuff, which is why people get high on opiates and other things. But endorphins. So here's what will happen. My brain goes to release it, so the neurons in my brain will send the signal to release endorphins, right? That's how I'll feel the way I feel when I'm not feeling painful or I'm feeling euphoric or whatever. So I get the signal, it comes down. I get the electrical signal, kind of like a Morse code, tells the axon which one to release. And they're stored here in the end, all right? So we'll just call these vacuoles, or the sacs with them, in the end of the axon here. So let's say my endorphins are kept here, and dopamine's here, and serotonin's there. All right, so got a bunch of endorphin neurotransmitters in here, dopamine here, serotonin here. I get the signal, or not I, but my neuron gets the signal to release endorphins. I don't know, say it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's like, oh, okay. So what it does is it basically opens this up and releases some endorphins, all right? And they're going to travel across here in this space, okay? So I get a bunch of endorphins. In this case, they're going to be circles. So here's a whole bunch of circles that go floating out. Hooray! There they go. All right, so they're between the gap, and they're going to float around in here. All right, some of them are going to float around and bump into a serotonin receptor. What's going to happen? Nothing. It's not going to hold, not going to activate it, right? It might go in there, but it's not going to send the signal that says, yes, serotonin. Nothing's going to happen. Just nothing. All right, same thing if it goes to a dopamine receptor, right? It's going to get in there, but it's not going to activate it. No signal gets sent. All right, but when it gets to an an endorphin receptor, it's going to fit in the slot, or have the right chemical signature, and that's going to activate the receptor here. Bing. And then it sends the signal right on down to the axon, to the next neuron, and so on and so forth. All right, that's how it works. Okay, that's how those signals go across. And there's a bunch of a bunch of endorphins. They'll find the receptors. These don't activate because that's the wrong one, and the signal goes on. That's how I relieve my pain in this case. All right. What's dopamine do? Well, what's one of the things it does when it's released in my brain?
Makes you happy.
Yeah, it's like my reward neurotransmitter, right? So let's say something really cool happened to me, and I experience happiness or positive emotion, whatever. My brain would activate my neurons to release dopamine. In this case, of course, they're going to be triangles in our little example. And they float over, and again, anytime they go to a terminal for serotonin, they might go in there, but they won't activate it, right? So nothing. Goes to an endorphin one, doesn't activate. Goes to a dopamine one, it does activate, right? And it activates it, the signal goes down to the next one. So it's the same process. So do you understand that? How your neurons send the signal, like between one another? They release what? What are those called, these chemicals? Neurotransmitters, right. And those float across this synaptic gap, and they activate receptors, all right? Only the ones that they chemically align with, that they fit into, all right? Genes actually have a big impact on how much these things affect you. So, if I'm somebody who has a, how could I phrase this? People that are more prone to addiction for, you know, what, like something that's excitatory. Maybe like cocaine, because cocaine basically enhances your dopamine receptors. Do you think I'm more or less likely to be addicted to a substance that mimics dopamine if I have more or less receptors for dopamine? So hold on, before you answer that, let me give you an example here. So let's say person A has got, you have way more receptors in this. I don't want to like oversimplify, but I want to keep the numbers low just so we can kind of understand it. So you have way more receptors than the numbers I'm going to give you, but here's an example. Let's say person A has dopamine receptors, and they've only got 5. All right. Person B, they've got 7. I'm not actually counting. I'm just going to put it up here. 7, and then this person over here's got 13. Sorry, person C has got 13 dopamine receptors. All right. And your genes pick how your brain is structured, your neurons, as far as like how many dopamine receptors you have, how many serotonin receptors you have, how many neurons you have in your brain, and sort of where they're connected better and more. But one of the things that definitely affects is how many receptors you have. All right. So, which person do you think is more likely to be addicted to dopamine type activities? Right. So things that make you feel good. Someone that feels like they need it more often.
A.
Okay. Well, let's do a vote.
Oh.
Yeah, let's do a vote. I'd rather do this. Have we done a vote in here before?
Mm-hmm.
We have. Okay. So we'll do it the same way. I want you to influence each other. So please put your heads down and cover it. So who do you think would be more likely to be addicted to dopamine type substances? So we got person A with 5 receptors, person B with 7, and person C with 13 receptors. Who thinks that person A is more likely to be addicted to dopamine type rushes or substances, experiences, whatever one it is? All right, so okay, here we go. Who thinks that person B is the most likely to be or most susceptible to addiction by dopamine? All right, cool. And again, you can get dopamine from anything. You get it from eating your favorite food or doing something you like or watching a funny video, whatever. Those are all dopamine. All right. Who thinks person C is the most likely to be addicted to it? All right, that wins by a large margin. Okay. So 20 plus of you said C, 8 of you said A, and only 2 of you said B. All right. You guys are correct on this one. It is person C. Why do you think, somebody give me an explanation for why they think person C is the most likely to be addicted to reward-based stimuli? And again, that could be eating the foods you like, watching funny videos, doing things that are fun, whatever it is, or drugs that simulate dopamine.
Because they already have a lot, so they don't want more.
What do you mean?
Like they already have a lot of dopamine, so like they're more likely to do drugs because they want more, because they like the feeling.
Okay, so do you think that more receptors even equal you feeling it more intensely?
Yeah.
That would be more or less correct. All right, there's more complications to it, but yeah, if you have more receptors for it, it's going to likely feel better or worse in this case. So people that have a lot of these dopamine receptors are generally a little more prone to addiction from dopamine or substances that mimic dopamine, which we'll get into in a second. All right, so that does have a major impact on your behavior. And what determines how many receptors I have in my neurons?
genetic?
Yeah, it's largely genetic, right? Because you're getting the same codings from your parents, and then you're likely to inherit the same amount of receptors as one of them. Or I'm not sure how the genes work with receptors. It might be like some sort of mix between the two. A lot of genes are like you either activate the one from your dad or activate the one from your mom. Sometimes they co-mix as far as their expression, but yeah, you were largely, this is largely genetically determined as far as how many receptors you have, so how sensitive you are to this stuff. All right, all right, so glad you understand that. Okay, so that's largely genetic as far as how many receptors you have. That's of course going to affect your behavior, because if I got way more dopamine receptors, I'm more likely to be addicted to dopamine type activities than someone who's not. Okay. Glad you understand that. All right, well, let's go back to what we're talking about. So, for example, was endorphins, right? Or no, we were doing dopamine now. So boom, dopamine's released. So the person over here, so it's this triangle. So this guy's got a ton of dopamine receptors. All right. So dopamine's released. They go around. They float around in here. They come up here. They activate it. Send a signal. All right. So what? Did they just stay there forever and keep activating and you keep feeling happy all the time? No, they don't always stay there. They're going to go back. All right, actually, two things going to happen. Some of them are absorbed back up into the axon, right? And they're just repackaged for another time. Some, because these are molecules and chemicals, some of them just break down out here and essentially disappear, and your body gets rid of them as waste. All right. That process of some, of course, breaking down and disappearing, and others being taken back into the previous axon for release later, that process is called reuptake. All right? So releasing them and having them activate the receptors, that's the communication. All right? And then your body, or your neurons, are going to reabsorb some of them for later use, and then some will break down over time. That's what reuptake is. All right. So let's say there's a person who's got we'll talk a lot more about depression later. There's a lot of factors that factor in. But for sake of keeping it simple, let's say this person has a life that is relatively good. They got a stable relationship, good family, good job. Everything's going well for them. But they're experiencing depression. So they're like feeling lethargic or hopeless or uninterested. And they look in their life and there's nothing to explain. It's not like they had a relative die or the relationship's bad or their job's bad or they just got a divorce. Nothing like that. Nothing that would suggest something's causing them to feel depressed just based on their life. What maybe could help that person out if their life is in order and yet they're experiencing depression? Do you guys remember? I think I told you this. Maybe I didn't tell you this actually. Which neurotransmitter? Yeah, serotonin. That can help out people who are experiencing depression. If you're depressed because of some issue in your life, like something's going on that's causing it, the medication may not help as much as it would somebody who has a life that's stable and fulfilling, and they're experiencing. In that case, it might just be their brain chemistry. All right, so I want to tell you that before we talk about depression. It's complicated. Just because you feel depressed doesn't mean I go to the therapist and get happy pills. That's not how it works. If your problem isn't purely physiological, having to do with your neurons, then the medication might not work at all, or it might only help. There might be other factors. We'll get to that later, though. For now, let's talk about a person who the only problem they have is there's a malfunctioning in their neurons. All right, so their life's fine, but they're not getting enough serotonin. All right, so their body doesn't have enough, or they don't release enough, or whatever. So when I would normally have serotonin releases that keep me emotionally stable and all of that, which is going on, off and on throughout the day. Let's say normal people have a bunch of this out there. This person, though, for whatever reason, they have very low serotonin. There's only a couple that go in and out, right? And we found that if all of the factors are okay and you have low serotonin levels, that can be the cause, and then they can fix it with medication sometimes. Most of the time in that case. All right? So, my problem then is what for this person who's experiencing it? What are they lacking? How could we Well, you know what they're lacking. They're lacking serotonin. How could we help them out with medication?
Give them more serotonin.
Okay. It's not like we can just package serotonin and have you just drink it, though. So it's a little more complicated than that. And there's different forms of these. But that's essentially what you're doing. You're trying to give them more serotonin. All right? So it's not like you just inject them with it. But there are and there's multiple types of antidepressants. Some of them have to deal with dopamine too. But we'll stick with the serotonin ones. Some of these are called SSRIs. And basically all they are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. All right, this is where the words start getting tricky. So reuptake, what's reuptake mean?
So when it's destroyed or it goes back?
Okay, cool. Specifically when it goes back, yeah. So it's reabsorbed. All right, what's inhibit mean? To stop it. So what do you think a reuptake inhibitor does?
It makes it go back and not come back.
What?
It stops it from going back.
It stops it from going back, from being reuptaken, I guess you would say, okay? So these don't necessarily give them more serotonin. It just keeps the serotonin active longer, all right? So instead of the serotonin going, hop, activate 1 or 2, and then going right back, and that person not getting enough stimulation from serotonin, it blocks the reuptake, all right? I'm not exactly sure how the actual chemical works. I don't know if it makes like the receptors that take it back, blocks them, or it causes these stacks that hold them to not activate. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but I do know that it prevents the serotonin from being reuptaken, all right? So that means the serotonin particles or molecules keep floating around. And if they keep floating around in here, what are they gonna do inevitably? What?
Dissolve.
Okay, they will eventually. But until they dissolve, what are they going to be doing in there? Are they just going to sit there and not do anything?
They could go back in.
Yeah, they're going to go back and keep activating these serotonin receptors. So if I'm a person that their issue is they're lacking serotonin and they're causing to feel depressed, if I give them an SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and I stop the serotonin from going back up into the axon and I keep it in that gap and it keeps activating more and more serotonin receptors, it's almost like having more serotonin because I'm getting more stimulation from it throughout the day, all right? And that's essentially how they work, okay? And that's the process of reuptake. So that's what I want to get across to you. I don't remember if it's in the notes or not, but are SSRIs or serotonin reuptake inhibitors in there at all? Some of you say yes, some of you say no. Enough of you said yes for me to think that there is. So that's how they work. All right, so that's how this one particular branch of antidepressants work. They block the reuptake of serotonin. So your body releases it, or not your body, your neurons release it, they activate serotonin, and instead of going back up and stopping and you not getting any more serotonin stimulation, they're blocked and they stay there and they keep over time activating those receptors. All right, and that's almost the same thing as you having more serotonin, which in this case could help you out with your depression. You follow me on that? Nice. Okay. Now you're going to tell me, how does my neuron communicate with the next neuron? You don't need to do the whole process, just like give me one step of it. So the axon gets the electrical signal, and where are we at when it gets to the that area between the neurons? But first, let's start first with this. What's the name for the area between those neurons? No. Go in hands. Yeah, synaptic gap. Where's my little pen? There it is. Synaptic gap. Sweet, cool. Got that. Synaptic gap. All right. So if I hear the term synapse, what do I think we're talking about?
The processing.
Yeah, exactly, that process of communicating. Okay, speaking of which, I'll stick with you just because I can't quite give that point, but maybe I could for this one. How does it communicate with the next one? Just communicating from here to here.
So it releases neurotransmitters.
There we go. At least neurotransmitters, sweet. All those neurotransmitters get flung out from the axon. They cross that synaptic gap, and they activate receptors there. Cool, I give you that. Excellent. And that's called a synapse, right? The communications between the two. All right, so I released a bunch. They're activating the receptors. Tell me about these receptors as far as like how they work, or what determines how many I have, anything along those lines.
So it's genetically determined how many you have.
Mhm.
And they're like not necessarily shaped a certain way,
Right.
but they only interact with like the neurotransmitter that it's like assigned.
Exactly, right. And we use shapes to make it simple for our brains to understand. But yeah, they're only going to accept a matching neurotransmitter. If a dopamine comes up to a serotonin one, it's not going to activate it. All right, cool. So that's how it communicates. Sweet, you're racking up some serious Morgan bucks. Then what? After they've activated, what happens next? So you've activated a few, they float it around, and then what's going to happen?
They send the signal to the next neuron.
Okay, they do, but I'm talking about, they've already done that. So, activated it. They've already done their activations. Now what?
They either dissolve or they get reuptake happens.
Yeah, exactly. What is reuptake?
They go back to where they were.
Yeah, they go back to the original neuron, and they're stored again. So some do dissolve, but some are taken back, and that of course is called reuptake. Well done. And what else did I want to say about this? Oh, what are a couple ways? What's one way I could, if somebody's lacking a neurotransmitter, whether it's dopamine or it's serotonin or whatever, what's one way that I told you that you can allow that person to experience more of that neurotransmitter? All right, I don't know who was first in that one. I think it was you by a hair.
You could give them a reuptake inhibitor and like it can't go back, so it just has to stay there and activate.
Cool, exactly right. So it prevents the reuptake process as a reuptake inhibitor, and those can't go back in, so they eventually float back and keep reactivating those receptors. Excellent. Okay, cool. So we got that? You're with me on that one? Sweet. Next, I want to discuss drugs.
Yay.
Besides drugs are bad, okay. All right, so what drugs are essentially is they either provide you with a lot of neurotransmitters or they mimic them. They fit the receptor slot essentially. All right. Yeah, cocaine's one of them, right? You could the drugs do different things. Some of them mimic, some of them cause you to release your own. Some of them activate different neurotransmitters, but yeah, let's use cocaine as an example, okay? So somebody who uses cocaine, what they're experiencing is, well, several of these. I believe it's epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine, but they're not getting necessarily more of those for themselves. The chemicals in the cocaine, along with them, are activating the receptors. All right, so let's say I have a molecule of whatever in the cocaine. All right, that's the C here. All right, if my body, dopamine, we'll just focus on the dopamine, right? That's my positive happiness. Like there's other ones too, along with cocaine, but we'll just focus on that. So I got my dopamine that normally makes me feel happy, right? So whatever amount I normally have, let's just say in this case it's 2. Obviously I have way more than that, but let's say it's 2. Cocaine's like a big flood of those, like all at once in a very short amount of time. And what those do is, what would normally only be activated by dopamine, these molecules from the cocaine actually do activate the dopamine receptor as well, even though there's no dopamine there. All right? So these, they mimic it. They fit the same slot. All right? And that is called an agonist. They are going to, of course, mimic a neurotransmitter. All right? So it's not dopamine itself, although I'm going to get a release of dopamine too, but it's not dopamine itself, but in this case, this drug can mimic dopamine. So when it goes to the receptor, it activates it as if dopamine was there. All right. And this is a super rush of it, and you can't reuptake this. So it's just going to stay there till it dissolves or run its course. So for like, I don't know exactly how long the effects of cocaine last, but I know it's shorter than most drugs. So let's just say it's 2 hours. For like 2 hours, especially when you first take it, you're going to feel really good. all right? Because they can't be reuptaken. They keep activating the dopamine receptors like crazy. You feel amazing. You feel super alert, all that stuff. They slowly dissolve over time. So as those 2 hours go on, you feel a little less, until it's gone, all right? And that's essentially what drugs do. So some of them stay in there for much longer. Some of them provide you with more of your own neurotransmitters. Some of them are going to mimic it, but that's sort of how they work. They're going to, again, cause you to release more of your own, or they're going to mimic and activate them themselves. And that's why you get that sensation. That's why they're so addictive. That's why people like using them, obviously, is because whatever it is that you want, in this case, it's going to be, alertness, energy, happiness for cocaine. That's what they're going for. All right. Same thing for painkiller drugs. So any opioids, like heroin, for example, those are going to be, what kind of receptors are they going to be activating a lot? Not serotonin. I mean, it might. I don't know all the details of it, but primarily, heroin's going to be activating the endorphin receptors, right? So that's my painkiller / euphoric / warm, floaty, whatever feeling. So in that case, if somebody were to use heroin or any opiate, any painkiller like Vicodin, codeine, whatever, they're going to be activating their endorphins. All right. So let's just say they used heroin in this case. And that's not like a bad word in this class. We actually look at individual drugs and what they do as part of the class, as part of the curriculum for the AP test. All right, and then, that's going to be mimicking the endorphin receptors. So as long as they are there, not being reuptaken, not being dissolved, they're going to constantly activate your endorphin receptors. That's exactly what drugs do. So some are agonists. They just mimic it and then they dissolve. But some are antagonists. For the most part, antagonists are going to bind to a receptor, closing it off forever, or at least for a very long time. And most of them don't activate it. So let's pretend this was a dopamine receptor. That's partly how happy I can feel. Like if I get a bunch of dopamine and I've got 10 receptors, the max I can feel is, that 10 out of 10 dopamine receptors. All right, again, don't forget you have way more than this. I'm just keeping the number low. All right, so again, pretend you got 10 dopamine receptors. All right, so every time you're super happy, the happiest you can feel, that's when you got all 10 of those bad boys being activated. What antagonists can do is they can go to your receptors, whether it's dopamine, endorphins, whatever the receptor is, the neurotransmitter. They can bind to it and block it so that no more times, never again can, or at least not for a super long time, and sometimes never again, your dopamine cannot enter and activate it. So just what happened to your happiness?
Or at least
It's permanently what? Up? Down? Yeah, it's permanently lower than it can be. So now, let's say, because cocaine can do this, it has some chemicals in it that are antagonists that can permanently block your dopamine receptors. That doesn't mean like, well, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but they can permanently block some of your dopamine receptors. So there's some famous, like Ozzy Osbourne, for example. He used a lot in his life, and he's blocked so many of his dopamine receptors and others that he's got a lot of neurological issues because of it. He has cocaine-induced Parkinson's? I don't know if it's Parkinson's or not. But he's got several neurological issues just because he's bound up so many of his neurotransmitting receptors that he can't function quite normally. Obviously, he's still alive and all that. But if you ever watched a show years ago or you've seen an interview with him, like, he's much different. There's a lot going on there in his brain. But yeah, so let's say in this example, this person uses cocaine. Some of the molecules in it are antagonists. They block their dopamine receptors forever. So now, even if they're in a situation that makes them as happy as they can be, the best they could ever be is if it blocks to, let's say, an 8 out of 10. So whatever their happiest moment of their life was, they can only get 80% of that from now on. And that's going to go down and down and down the more you use it, obviously. All right. Not all drugs are antagonists or have it in there, but some do. And they are sometimes permanent block of a neurotransmitter treating receptor. all right? And most don't activate it too. So once that's blocked, that's just, now you can't be that happy again, all right? And then the more you block permanently, that's the less happy you can feel, all right? That's not so much related to addiction though. That's more of a future unit, but I want to kind of preview it for a second for you. So why would using heroin or cocaine, because these all do very quickly make you addicted to the point that you can't just take it and then when it goes away you're like, oh, that was fun, and then go back to your life. You actually feel worse until you take it again. That's what addiction is, all right? Why? Why would that occur? It does have to do with these neurotransmitters. Why would those drugs, or medications, depending on what you're talking about, be so addictive? Why would I need them again to feel not bad?
Because when you use it that first time, they start blocking your receptors.
Oh yeah, I said except for that. You're right. That could be a part of it. But I mean, like, I don't know if heroin has antagonists, but I do know that one use of it can make you addicted right off the bat. Like, it's when it wears off, you'll feel crappy and need it again, at least to some degree. Why?
It's like, cause you start to get used to it, and then like now that it's gone, like your body's like, wait, I still need it.
Yeah, okay. And in this case, getting used to it means your body sort of keeps track of what it needs to make. All right. So if I'm getting a whole bunch of, so for heroin, we're talking about endorphins. If I'm using a painkiller constantly, whether it's heroin or an opiate, or even if I'm using a bunch of Advil all the time, your body tracks that. It's like, well, we never even use endorphins because they're always being activated. So clearly we have too many endorphins. Let's just stop making endorphins. So your body stops making your own natural endorphins, right? Because you just got this medication rolling around in here. So your body doesn't know it's a medication. They think that you've produced so much endorphins that you don't need any more for now. So they cut production of it. All right, that doesn't mean it can never go back. It can, but for a period, you will have no or very low endorphin production. So any pain that your body was zoning out, any euphoria or nice feelings you were having because of your natural endorphin supply, it's gone for a while because your body stopped making them. So when that medication goes away and your body has stopped production of endorphins on its own, you're going to feel terrible. Like, you're going to feel any ounce of pain that you might not normally feel or care about. You're going to feel aggravated. You're going to feel crappy, essentially, which of course is going to motivate you to do what? If I'm feeling terrible because the heroin or whatever wore off, what am I going to really want to do? Yeah, to go back to feeling that way and to get more. And that's exactly how addiction occurs. All right. And you can kind of see too, if I've got a ton of receptors for it and it feels just that much better, that makes me more likely to be addicted to it, obviously. All right. So that's kind of how addiction works. And that's how agonists and antagonists work. Unit 2 is pretty much about how your biology affects your behavior. So some of it's genetic, like you inherit it, like the amount of receptors you have, which makes you more or less susceptible to certain behaviors or addictions. I don't ever want to make you think that like something's set in stone. I mean, the amount of receptors you have might be set in stone, but it doesn't mean that, oh, every person with more dopamine receptors always gets addicted to dopamine stimulation. They don't always, or at least not substances. It just makes you more likely to. All right, so I want you to think of behavior correctly. It's not like genetically determined, where if I get this, it means I'm going to do this. It's not environmentally determined, meaning if I'm brought up this way, I'm going to do this every time, or just because I had this epigenetic effect, I'm going to do this every time. It just increases the likelihood you'll do it. All right. So there's actually usually a difference in the brain between people that are in prison for violent crimes and people that aren't, because certain elements of their brain, which we'll talk about, make them more likely to commit this violent behavior and end up there. But again, it's a probability. It doesn't mean that they all will, or none of them will escape prison. I don't mean like escape, by the way, but none of them will. Doesn't mean that no one without this brain feature will end up in prison, because that's not true. But it also doesn't mean that everyone with these features will end up in prison, because that's also not true. It just makes you more likely to do things or not do things. All right. Okay. And it can affect what you like and don't like, and what potential you have for intelligence. But there are other factors too, which we'll talk about. So, how biology affects our behavior. So what's so far talking about the endocrine system or neurons? What are some things that could happen in my body, neurologically or hormonally, that could affect my behavior? Could increase the odds or decrease the odds that I will or won't do certain things. You can name any. Could be from the endocrine system, could be from the neural system. How might my behavior be affected by my biology? There's a lot of ways to go with this.
Like the endocrine system, if you are producing a lot of sex hormones, like testosterone, for example. So if you have like a flow and a lot of testosterone flowing through your body, you tend to be like more aggressive.
Yeah, it makes you more prone to being aggressive, right? So as far as biology and behavior, because that's what this unit's about, how your biology does impact your behavior. Right, hormones can definitely do it, right? So in the case of testosterone, we know that increasing amounts of testosterone make you more likely to be aggressive. And you, not just that like you think differently, which you do, but you actually see the difference, like they behave differently. You can count the amount of times, mice or animals or people that are experiencing increased testosterone levels or are given testosterone to boost their levels. You'll see the amount of times, like mice, how often they fight or exhibit aggressive actions towards other mice just by injecting them. Can I decrease it and see them decrease those behaviors? Yeah, how do we do that? How did they do it with mice anyway? Someone whispered it.
Castrated.
Yeah, they castrated them, right. So they lost access to their testicles, so they didn't have their own natural supply of testosterone, and those mice or bulls or whoever, they turned into these docile, almost pacifist creatures. Right, so testosterone hormones. Okay, cool. What's another one that affects my behavior? Increases the probability I will or won't do things. Could be genetic, could be environmental, but as long as it's biological, what could something be? I've given you a bunch of examples, but I mean, those were days ago.
Like the number of receptors that you have.
Okay, tell me about that.
So if you have, like you just went over, if you have a lot of receptors for dopamine,
Okay.
You're more susceptible to being addicted and partaking in acts that cause you to have like rush.
Okay, yeah, exactly. It makes me more likely to do those things. Okay, so if I have a whole bunch of dopamine receptors, I'm more likely to be addicted to activities or substances that give me that dopamine hit, essentially, because I feel it more intensely than they do. So that can affect my behavior, right? So it could be dopamine or whatever. All right. It can also make me more likely to be addicted to those activities because I constantly want it and need it. Does it mean that I'm going to be addicted 100%? Not necessarily, but it certainly increases the chances that that'll happen, right? And then the amount of receptors I have is for the most part genetically determined. And again, that has an impact on my behavior. It doesn't determine it necessarily, but it has an impact on it, a big one. All right. Are there any examples we have? Those are the two biggest ones. I give you marker bucks for both of those, by the way. Any others? I know it's early on in the class, we haven't talked about a whole lot yet, but is there anything else that could affect your biology that would change could affect the way you behave? No more examples? Okay, well, we'll keep going then. So, that's what we're talking about. I really wanted this one, so as long as we got that one. As long as you have an example from hormones, I'm cool with that. But that's a pretty good start there, having those two. So we know now how a single neuron, and I have billions in my body, we now know how a single neuron communicates. So let's look a little bit more at how they actually communicate throughout the body. So first we'll do the nervous system, and then we'll look more at the brain, because I want to talk briefly at least about how genes and environment can actually change the makeup of your brain. And the makeup of your brain can determine or influence things that you like or don't like, or aggressive or non-aggressive behaviors, and all sorts of things. And what you can and can't do. It's quite interesting how important normal development of the brain is, and how if you alter it in any way, it can really alter your behavior or abilities or preferences or whatever. All right. So here's my terrible human who's overly sized, but it's better because I can draw inside of him. All right, and then we don't need his feet, but you know his feet are down there too. All right, brain up here, right? Spinal cord, right? And that's where most of your bones are connected to. So you're pretty mechanical as far as like your bone structure and tendons. You're pretty much just a bunch of pulls and levers that are connected through bone and tendons and muscles, and they either contract or expand or pull to move you around. But your brain is the one that's telling them to contract or release or whatever, right? So you're pretty damn robotic as far as how you operate. But your brain's the one that gives the commands for, like, if I want to bring my fist up here towards my head, there's other things involved, but it's mostly your biceps contracting, right? And the thing that's doing that is my brain is telling me to. Do you guys remember what part of your cortical, which is the outside layer of your brain, does that for the most part? Motor cortex, thank you. That's like back in here in this region. And we actually know that part of the brain handles that. We'll get into how in a little bit. But just for right now, know that. You got a bunch of bones, tendons, muscles. Those all contract and relax, and that's how you essentially move, but your brain is sending the signal. So when I get a signal from my motor cortex, it's going to travel to the muscle or tendon or wherever and give it the command to contract or release or whatever. So the way it goes through is it initially goes from my brain to my spinal cord. And in my spinal cord are a whole bunch of nerves, a bunch of fluids too that carry those nerves. That's kind of where all of the messages going in and out of my body come from and go through. It's like, that's why it's protected. That's why there's literally bone around it to protect it. Creatures that maybe didn't have the bones around to protect it, they didn't survive because those things are too vital to damage. You damage your spinal cord, you break spinal cord, not corn. You break your spinal cord or damage it in any way, it can really affect what you can and can't do in your body. Like, if you break your neck or your back, you could disable your motor functions, which means you can't move your limbs anymore, or perhaps you can't feel below your waist or your neck or whatever. And the reason why is all the neurons that carry the messages out to your limbs and all the parts of your body, they go through that spinal cord, which is attached to your brain, and that is your central nervous system. All right? And it's actually, technically, some people actually lump it in with part of the brain because it can actually act on its own sometimes. We'll get into that later when we get to reflexes. Like, for example, I'll just give you a quick example. If I pretend this is like a really hot stove, and I'm like, blah, 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 and I do that, what am I going to do instantaneously before I even know what happened? Yeah, my hands go like that, right? Am I going to go, oh, that's a very hot sensation. I should probably remove my hand from that surface and then take it away? Do I have time to do that? No, because what happens instantly before you even know what happened? Boom! Your hand comes up, right? Were you aware of what you touched? Did you have time to think that surface was hot and you should remove your hand from it? But what happened? My hand moved itself. How did it do that? Yeah, you actually have a series of instincts from some past ancestor that actually gets the signal in your spinal cord before it even gets to your brain, before you even notice it's happening, that immediately goes, oh, that's bad. No, pull away. So that's actually helpful because that little increment of time can mean the difference between like falling into something that would kill you or like, let's say you see a snake on the ground right next to you. You'll jump before you realize the snake's there. And those little milliseconds where your spinal cord tells you what to do right away, because based on a feeling or whatever, like you feel a spider or something on you, the first thing you do is go, oh, like that, before you even realize what the feeling itself is. Those reactions are largely embedded into your spinal cord. Because those extra milliseconds you got from pulling your hand away from a dangerous surface or getting that spider off you saved a past ancestor who didn't have that reaction and got bit or fell into the fire or whatever, or put his hand on the fire for too long, so then it got burned and damaged and he got infected and he died. But you didn't, because your ancestor went like this instead of like this. Ow! Right? That actually could mean life or death further back in evolutionary history. Anyways, I always thought that was cool. You guys don't seem as amused by it, but I thought it was cool. Central nervous system. Your spinal cord's a part of it. all the signals going from your extremities to your brain go through this. So it's like a, what's the word I could use for this? If you're talking roads, all the streets in Lathrop that go off, usually, and they usually dead end, right? Like some streets go through to other cities, but a lot of them end up dead ending. Those are kind of like the nerves in what's called your peripheral nervous system. They're much smaller roads that usually have only one or a few connections. All right, so those are like tiny streets in a city. All right, not every street in a city can take you to Washington State. In fact, none of them can. All right, they'll all end somewhere. So those are the ones on your extremes, the extremities. That's called your peripheral nervous system. Okay, but they are connected to the central nervous system. That's kind of like the interstate system here. All right, so if I want to actually go to Washington, let's pretend my brain is Washington. If I want to actually go to Washington, the only road I can really take is I-5, which is right there. All right, so this is kind of like I-5. All the roads connect to it, and in this case, I-5, or in this case, your central nervous system, your spine, that's what goes to your brain and gets the message to it. So let's use the hand example. I put my hand down here, and I get burned. Obviously, my spinal cord will get the message like, no, take your hand off, and it'll pull it off. But me experiencing that painful burning sensation, that is going to obviously hit my hand. So that will activate the neurons, my sensory neurons. This is how I feel touch, or heat, or cold, or pain. Those will activate and be like, you're touching something dangerous, in this case hot. And it'll send the signal up the peripheral nervous system to the, what's this one? Spinal cord or central nervous system, and then that'll get the message to your brain. That's how it knows something happened to it. All right, and that's where it has to go. So, what if I was in an accident and car flipped, whatever, and I broke my neck? What could possibly happen?
Paralyzed from there to
Yeah, it could be. I'm not talking about movement yet. But you're right, that could happen. What could happen potentially?
You can halt the sending of signals from your peripheral nervous system and
Yeah, and in this case I'm talking about my sensory neurons, the ones that feel pain, touch, etc. Because those are different from the ones that move me, and I'll get into that in a second. So yeah, I could potentially, depending on which pathways I damaged, or the whole thing maybe, I could lose contact with my peripheral nervous system. So now I can't even feel anything, it's just numb. All right, that could occur. They always make fun of them Family Guy. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Family Guy. Some of you are smirking. Or they'll stab Joe's leg because he has no feeling below his hip or something like that. And they always make jokes about that one. But that's what's going on in this fictional character's existence is his sensory neurons are not connected in his legs, so he can't feel his legs. All right, and they make fun of that all the time in Family Guy. All right, okay. So that peripheral nervous system is my the extremities, right? And then my central nervous system is the one going to my spine, connected to my brain, brainstem and my brain. All right, so I actually have a few different types of neurons, and that's why I think you said you might be able to move, but I'm like, wait, that's motor, because it's actually different. So one of the nervous systems that's a part of this highway, so think of it like this. The peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system, they're the names for all neurons that connect to the brain. All right, so it's like a map. All right, but some of these roads actually do different things. All right, but they're all using neurons. So when I say peripheral nervous system or central nervous system, I just mean all the roads. Do all the roads do the same thing? No, they don't. In a street, they don't all take me to the same places. They don't have the same amount of lanes. They don't all go the same direction. So just like a road map, this is my term using for like roads and highways, but they do different things. So one example is my somatic nervous system. All right, so some of these peripheral nerves are part of this system. All right, so peripheral and central nervous system, that's just all nerves and nerve cells that communicate to my brain. Somatic, I'm talking about specific ones that do specific things. So somatic, I got two that we talk about. First one is sensory. The other one is motor. What do you think my motor neurons do? Yeah, that's my movement, right? My voluntary movement in this case. Correct. I forgot to give you guys more much the last couple. All right. That's my voluntary movement, right? So if I want to walk like I just did from that spot to that, and I'm pointing and moving like that, those are all signals coming from my motor cortex in my brain, going down my spine, through my peripheral nervous system, and telling my muscles and tendons to contract or relax. All right, that's how motor neurons work. And again, so if I got into an accident and I couldn't move the right side of my body anymore, but I could feel it, is that a possibility? Would I be able to not move it but possibly feel it?
See.
Possibly. Okay, and that's because my sensory neurons are different from my motor neurons. So these are voluntary movement. All right, because I'm choosing to walk when I do this, and I'm choosing to move my hands. I might not be thinking about it, but that's become a part of my voluntary movement when I talk. All right, sensory though, that's how I feel things. And I don't mean like emotions, I mean like actual contact, like my feeling as far as pressure, so if I'm being touched or not by something, temperature, whether it's hot or cold or, you know, nothing. But that's also how I could experience chemicals too. So acids or bases, that's actually technically, I didn't know this until I taught the class, that's actually a different feeling receptor than for pain or pressure. But those are the three things I can experience. So, to put it mildly, we'll put this as your sense of touch. All right, and that can be pressure, which is touching you or not, temperature, or chemical. All right, so it is possible, depending on how I'm injured, if I get injured, that I could still have movement of a region, but I could lose sensation. So I could either not feel it at all, or feel it less, or feel it more. It depends on the injury that I experience, but that's how it gets there, right? So if I were to somehow go in, I mean, no one would do this, hopefully, intentionally. If I were to go in and be like, snip, 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 and snip some of these nerves, and only cut sensory neurons, I might not feel this part of my body that's, you know, connected. If it was just the arm, obviously it would stick to just the arm. But that would cut off my sense of feeling in that limb. All right, but I could potentially have some or all my motor movement if I left those motor neurons intact.
Is it kind of like when your arm falls asleep?
A little bit. That's more so to do. That's actually a reaction by your body. So that's not what you're actually feeling. Like you're not actually feeling pins and needles there. That's a response by your body, an uncomfortable feeling. So you know that you're cutting off a blood supply to a part of you. Because let's say that didn't happen. This is a good example actually. Let's pretend if I cut off the blood to my leg because the way I was sitting, my body didn't make me feel uncomfortable. What might happen if I stayed there for too long? I could lose the cells in my leg. They could die. All right, I could kill parts of or all of my body unintentionally by doing that. Like if I go to sleep and I fall asleep there and I don't wake up and I wake up, but I wake up and I don't move and I still have the blood supply cut off to part of my arm. If I don't have that weird prickly feeling that's really uncomfortable and gets me to move, I might cause some of the cells in my muscle tissue or skin tissue or bone tissue or whatever, not the bones, but I could cut some of the tissue, my arm could die because it doesn't have the blood supply. So that's what that is. So that's not you feeling something on the outside, that's actually your body going, hey, we don't get blood here, so it makes it uncomfortable, so you move it. That happens too sometimes when you're sleeping and you twitch. That's a similar phenomenon where your body's like losing contact with it and you're like, and it'll snap really out of it. Anyways, that's your somatic nervous system, all right? And that's, of course, sensory. And don't confuse these two guys. So this is a blanket term for both of these, but they are separate things with separate functions, all right? And I can lose or gain one or the other depending on an injury to my brain or spinal cord or nerves in my peripheral nervous system. All right, but again, this is where people do get confused because I'm talking about a lot of nervous systems. All of them are part of these two because that's just the generic term for all neural systems that connect to your brain. But now when we get down to these names here, somatic, for example, they have specific functions. All right. So these neurons can't do this perform that role, and vice versa. If I lose them, I lose them. All right. When I'm growing and they're stem cells, they can go any way they want, and my DNA tells them which ones to become. But after that, once I've grown, you already have it. If you lose those cells, there's a good chance they're just done. There's a small chance they could repair and reconnect, but it's rare and usually doesn't happen. All right. There's another nervous system I have that's very important. That's not voluntary. All right. So motor is definitely voluntary. Sensory is not voluntary either, because I can't be like, no, I don't want to feel the pain in my arm anymore, and then make it and turn it off. I can't do that. But this is a form of movement. It's activity, right? Feeling's not active. I can sit here, do nothing, and I'll feel things, right? Whether it gets colder or hotter or whatever. But this I have to choose to move, correct? For the most part, or at least if you're talking motor cortex. If I want to get up and move, I have to decide to do that and voluntarily do that. There's part of your nervous system, though, that actually controls you that you cannot control yourself voluntarily. So there's things we always need to be happening that if we forgot to do them, we would die. You know what it is?
Automatic.
Autonomic, actually. There was a typo on the notes. It's autonomic, by the way. Autonomic. Yeah, I make those notes with a speech-to-text program, so sometimes I mumble it or it mishears me and it puts another word. That's what happened in that case. Autonomic. If you put automatic, I wouldn't be too upset, but it is autonomic. Autonomic nervous system is what, what do I need to do all the time that I'm not doing voluntarily?
Breathing, digesting your food, heartbeat.
You can actually stop breathing if you want. You can hold your breath. But what are the things that I cannot stop? You did mention a couple of them.
Your heart beating.
Yeah, as far as I know, you can't intentionally stop your heart beating just by trying to. You could stop it physically, but you can't be like, all right, and you can't voluntarily stop it. Same with digestion. So there's several functions your organs perform that you your brain's actually telling them to move, but you can't consciously tell it not to. All right, that's the autonomic nervous system, and that's going to handle your how can we phrase it? Involuntary functions, I guess you could say. But if you want to know some examples, of course, digesting, the moving of your food down through your intestines, you don't do that on purpose. You have no control of it. Your heartbeat, you have no control of that either. So a lot of those activities are conducted by your autonomic nervous system. All right, and those, by the way, are in your brainstem usually. The medulla and the pons and stuff like that, they regulate those to a large degree. All right, and again, those are older parts of your brain, meaning you have to go much further back to find your common ancestor for that one. Okay, in evolutionary time. So the other, I feel like there's another one I'm forgetting. Oh, speeding you up and slowing you down. Part of this is your nervous system that provides you with excess energy, right? It's part of the whole adrenal gland and norepinephrine. So if I'm stressed out, I see something scary, and the adrenaline's released, this will speed up my system. It'll focus me to release norepinephrine and that adrenaline, and then cause my body to respond by breathing faster. It'll raise my heartbeat, so I have more oxygen ready. So if I need to run or fight, I've got that energy supply already good to go. It runs you at max, essentially. All right, because again, when I'm in a situation where I feel like it's life or death, and again, my body doesn't always know if it's a lion or if I'm just talking to somebody I'm not comfortable with, but whatever. Your body responds the same. If it's a stress factor, if it's something your brain fears for whatever reason, you'll get that adrenaline, that norepinephrine, and to use them, you actually have to have more oxygen in your bloodstream and your muscles to actually run. That's the mechanics of how it works. All right, so that's why when you are scared or stressed or whatever, your heart rate increases. You can't tell it not to. You can try to meditate and breathe and sort of trick it into slowing down, but I can't be like, come on, heart, I don't want to beat so fast right now. You can't do that. It automatically picks up. And again, that's so you can run or fight this thing that your brain fears. That is part of your sympathetic nervous system. All right, that's the one that speeds you up. Okay, so that's the one that increases your breathing, involuntarily, increases your pulse and all of that, your blood pressure, all those things, so that you can face whatever the threat is and fight it or run from it. All right? But again, don't forget, the part of your brain that activates that is stupid by our standards, so it doesn't know the difference between an actual threat to your life and just something that you find threatening, like going and giving a speech, or what else might you be afraid of? Oh, standing at the edge of a building, even if it has guardrails, you're not gonna fall off that thing, but some people still get like this terror surge of stress and anxiety because their body fears the height, even though they know they can't fall off of it. So you can't stop these things necessarily. All right, and if I want to slow down, if I want to drain the adrenaline and norepinephrine, and I want to slow my heartbeat down and all that, what handles the slowing down is the parasympathetic. It's the same thing, but just add a para to it. That slows. Speed. Slow. And that's how it works. I'm trying to make sure. I believe that's, sometimes I swap these in my brain, but I think that's the correct one. Sometimes I have them swap, but sympathetic, the way I remember it is, it's sympathetic to your fears, so it speeds up your system. And then parasympathetic slows it down. So, any questions about those? All right, those are all parts of my nervous systems. And again, all of these are included in this roadmap that is my central nervous system that gets all the communications to the brain, and my peripheral nervous system that carries all those messages to my spinal cord, central nervous system. All right. So now hopefully you can kind of understand a little bit how certain injuries might make somebody lose sensation to an area or affect the way they feel things. You can have some bad ones too. Like I know one of my neighbors, when I was a kid, he like fell off a ladder and hurt his spine or neck somehow. And he didn't lose sensation, but it like changed the way the signals were sent and how it was interpreted in his brain. So now he just like permanently felt a burning sensation in his on his tongue, like the left side of his tongue. Happened to my dad too. He had some wisdom teeth pulled out, and when they put the stuff in to numb him, they accidentally nipped the nerve lining in his jaw, and it actually causes it to constantly send like painful burning signals. Not like unbearable, I guess, but what would be considered very annoying constantly. And it's not that anything's happening, it's just that the part of the peripheral nervous system in his jaw, or in the case of my neighbor, somewhere in his spine, that'd be central nervous system, but they damage the neurons there, so they're sending incorrect signals. So even though there's nothing actually happening to them, they're experiencing discomfort and pain, which sucks, obviously. And again, neurons, for the most part, if you break them or damage them, they pretty much don't repair, either very slowly or not at all. So it's not something you want to do. One thing I want to remind you about before you forget all this, and we pack it up here in a second, but not yet. What are my nervous systems made up of? So like, let's take one specific, I didn't hear the right answer, but let's take one specific example. Let's focus in on my pinky fingers. That's gonna be one pinky finger. Whoops. Screw it, just the pinky finger. They lost the other one, sorry. This pinky finger, let's focus on one single neuron that takes the sense signal and brings it to the brain, all right? So this is the one neuron that says, that's waiting on my skin to see if something touches it that hurts or is hot or whatever. Boom, it's activated. And it goes down up the peripheral nervous system, and this is gonna be a sensory neuron, to my central nervous system in the spinal cord, to my brain, which then interprets how I felt. What's connecting that highway? Is it one single strand that goes directly to my brain? How does the message go there to there? You guys know this, actually. What? There we go. It's an electrochemical signal. So what's making up this pathway then? So yes, I'm using neurotransmitters and electricity, but like what's making up this road here? What's the asphalt in the road? Oh my gosh, you guys aren't going to beat the bell, are you? Neurons, thank you. So this is why you have billions of them. is they're so tiny you can't see them obviously, and this is a long distance for something that small. So it's just millions of neurons almost touching, right? That's the synaptic gap, all the way up to your brain, and that's how they're going to send that communication. Tomorrow, when I finish up this notebook page, we'll talk about the neurons in your brain, how they work and affect you, but that's the nervous system as far as your central and peripheral go. Back it up.